Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Human Risk podcast. And it's special because normally when I record these, there's a little bit of a time lag between when I record it and when I release it to you. And I've made an exception in the case of this particular episode because the subject that I'm going to talk to my guest Luca Dellanna about is coronavirus. And it's very much a moving story at the moment. And I wanted to get this topic out as quickly as I possibly can. So this was recorded on Wednesday, the 26th of February, 2020. And Luca is somebody that I came across when I was searching around for experts that could help me understand the behavioral dynamics around coronavirus, and in particular how governments and authorities were responding to it. And he's been doing some sterling work on Twitter, so I reached out to him and in a very short period of time managed to get him onto the podcast and record today's episode. So I hope you find this informative. We don't just talk about the coronavirus, we also then move on to explore some other aspects of Luca's work. It's incredibly insightful, incredibly fascinating stuff. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did recording it. So Luca, welcome to the Human Risk podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Christian.
So, as I mentioned in my introduction, you've been very active on Twitter talking about the coronavirus and in particular how governments have or haven't been responding to it. And so I guess if I was summarising your view, it would probably be to say that we're not taking it anywhere near seriously enough. Is that a fair depiction?
Yes, thank you.
And so what is it that you think we should be doing or governments should be doing more of to kind of contain the situation?
Yeah, so I think that the thing that we are getting the wrongest is that we think that the data we are receiving represents the real situation. So we have two big problems. The first one is that we can only discover the cases that we test. And we are not testing enough people. There are some countries like South Korea and Singapore that are doing an excellent job in testing people. And there are other countries instead that are limiting the number of tests that they are making. And some of them, they're doing it because they are still ramping up the production of kit tests. Other ones, they're doing it for political choices. But the thing is, unless you test, you do not know how many cases you have. And I'm reading an alarming number of cases of people that are saying, I'm coughing, I have fever. I've met personally with someone that had also similar symptoms. Some are medical workers and they want to be tested. And the government is refusing to test them because they have a policy, for example, that only tests them if they've been to China or if they've been an extremely close contact of a confirmed case. And in those cases, we cannot know how many cases there are in the country. So that's the thing that I was saying today on Twitter. Unless a country is also telling us how many tests it did, and how many people with symptoms are pending testing or suspected cases are pending testing, we don't know anything. Because if a country is coming and saying like we have only 40 cases and they've done 60 tests, then it's completely possible that they have clusters that they're not aware of. And this under-testing is the first problem. The second problem is that unfortunately this virus seems to have very long incubation periods and to transmit already from asymptomatic patients or from patients with very mild symptoms. Now, I don't want to give the wrong impression that a patient which is not coughing and fever can be as contagious as a fully symptomatic patient. That's not the case at all. I've read some estimates that say that someone asymptomatic is about 10-20% as contagious, but there is a high variance and uncertainty. But the point is, if the virus has an incubation period of 3 to 3 weeks, because there have been cases as long as 3 weeks or more, what we know, the number of confirmed cases that we have today in the country is representative of the situation 3 to 20 days before. So when Italy, for example, is saying we have about 300 cases, but they only began extensive testing last Friday, we actually, the 300 cases were the situation 1 or 2 weeks ago. And it's very possible that today there are many more cases. I don't want to say that it is the case, because of course it depends on how much contact those people had, like if they come from very crowded cities, if they're taking public transportation, if they're participating to buffets and they're coughing on the food, or maybe they're more reserved people. I mean, there are a lot of factors. So I do not want to say that necessarily the numbers that we know that a country had weeks ago will go exponentially. But what I'm saying is that we know much less than we know, that we think that we know. And so my point is, what I think that governments should do is that they should not wait for the numbers to pop up to act to reduce the spreading. They should assume that they already have some infections in the population. Now, I'm totally aware that taking restriction has a huge social, economical, and political cost. So I'm not saying that they should lock down cities before we know that there are cases in them. But there are already some steps which have a very high benefit compared to cost, like banning huge public events, banning buffets, in my opinion. Just today, 1 hour ago, we just learned that there has been a contagion case in Germany which participated to the carnival. And the carnival is huge. And apparently the guy participated even if he had symptoms. And now the authorities are saying that he had an undetermined number of contacts. And if you've ever been to a carnival, you know that it's it can get crazy. You can have people drinking from the same glass, from the same bottle. Of course, we don't know if it's the case, but I think that just crazy that they didn't stop the carnival, or at least they didn't try to contain it in some way. I'm making you an example. Also in Germany, there is the Oktoberfest. Now, the Oktoberfest is huge, but the thing is, it's divided into tents, and participants, they usually get into a tent and they stay in the tent for the whole day, and then they go home. And that's already much better than having an undiscriminated huge event, because at least if you know that there is a case, you know that the case went to the tent, and you only have to conduct checks on 1/20 of the people you would do otherwise. So the thing I'm saying is that if a government does not have already confirmed cases, he should already try to adopt some, let's call them quick wins, some low-hanging fruits, which have the best trade-off between the social, economical, and political costs and limiting the contagion.
I mean, that's pretty terrifying, because what you've basically described there is something that a Hollywood scriptwriter would come up with if they wanted to create a particularly scary virus. You know, it's hidden for some time, it spreads very quickly, and then, of course, you've got that human dynamic of I don't believe this is a problem until I see it's a problem, and then by which time it's too late. So we've really got a situation, haven't we, where this is the sort of stuff of Hollywood nightmare scripts?
Yes. I have to say that, it's not that bad as like a zombie movie, because otherwise, for example, in Italy, we would not have like 300 cases now, but we will have like populations that are coughing. In Singapore did an awesome job. Right now, the number of new cases is rising very, very, very slowly. So, but Singapore took an extensive action of tracing, and its advantage because it's a small island, it can control its borders, and the tracing is much easier. So I do not want to portray this virus as the invincible villain, but it's a villain that has to be fought. And the superpower of this villain is that because it's asymptomatic, it's one step ahead of us. And so to contrast it, we need to be 2 steps ahead, which means beginning to take preventive measures before the numbers justify it.
So, Luca, in your experience, are there other dynamics that multiply in this way that are parallels, or is this groundbreaking? Is it something that we haven't seen the likes of before?
Talking about multiplicative dynamics, there is another aspect which I think we should consider, which is the fact that healthcare, like mortality and support, depends also on the state of the healthcare. I'm making an example. In Singapore, it's more than 1 month that we have cases. I'm in Singapore right now, and no one died so far. And that's also because Singapore is able to deploy the full power of their healthcare system to cure those cases. Right now in Wuhan, for example, we have a much higher mortality rate, also because the hospitals are not able to work properly because they're overwhelmed with cases. And then you also have indirect cases. Like I'm imagining that someone was having, for example, a heart attack in Wuhan for completely unrelated reasons, is not able to get the same healthcare that they would get 1 year ago. So this virus is also vicious because if it hits a certain critical mass, such that it overwhelms the healthcare system, then the mortality of the virus and of all other illnesses and diseases also rises because the healthcare system is not able to provide adequately. And the same also for social systems. I'm thinking, for example, that if a family is put in quarantine, maybe they cannot provide for their elders. So the thing is that also the consequences of the virus, they have some multiplicative dynamics, which we should be very aware of. And that's why it's very important to not to listen to people that are telling you it's like another flu, or meteorites are killing more people, or whatever you hear these days. Because almost all the examples that are compared to the coronavirus are examples which are not following multiplicative dynamics anymore. And I'm putting the normal flu into this category because the flu is already widespread. So we already kind of reached saturation for the flu. Up to a certain limit, it's not fully true, but what I'm saying is we will not have, it's very unlikely that next year we will have 1,000 times the deaths from the flu as we had in 2019. Whereas instead, for coronavirus, it's totally possible.
So if we were looking for parallels, is there anything that we can compare this to? And I'm asking that because when you think about the way human beings react to situations, is we like analogies and we like comparing it to other things that we know. And so what we're seeing here is that people are finding parallels they think are appropriate, and you've outlined why, for example, the flu isn't an appropriate parallel. But that's what people are using, and therefore they are totally and utterly misjudging the risk because they're relating it to a parallel that's not relevant and therefore misinterpreting the situation because they just think it's the same thing. So if we want to get people to be thinking about this in the right way, is there a parallel you can think of that we could latch onto, that we could perhaps have as something they could focus on that would then help them to understand the real risks that are out there?
I cannot come with any good analogy on top of my mind right now, but I heard the two analogies which I think are worth mentioning. So the first one comes from Simone Butera, and he said the coronavirus is like if we have a Marvel villain coming on Earth, a crazy anti-hero, and he's about to destroy humanity, and people are saying, oh, he didn't kill anyone yet, so we should just care about sharks, for example. And the second analogy that I like is that people are reacting to the coronavirus right now just like if they were driving without a seatbelt, and they're saying like, anyway, if the car will go off-road, I will have time to wear the seatbelt, which is obviously not true. But I cannot think about any analogy which is pinpoint with the coronavirus. Yeah. No, the problem with the coronavirus is that once it begins spreading, like you cannot choose whether you're infected or not. Like you can take preventive measures, but if you get it, you get it. And that's very different from other kind of examples I can think of in which there is always some either the contagious person has some choice, or the contagion is happening in real time, like in a visible way. And I cannot think about any other example that, like the coronavirus, you can both not choose whether you're contagious or not once you're exposed to it, and it happens with a lag in observability, in visibility. Yeah.
And if we were to predict ahead, and I recognise that there's guesswork involved in this, what sort of situation are we facing if the authorities continue to behave in the way that they are at the moment? What's your assessment as to where this thing could go? Is it a case that every single person could be infected? How do you see that?
So you're asking me about the worst case. Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure. So the big problem is that we don't know exactly yet if one person gets infected and recovers, whether she can get infected again, and what's the time lapse between when she recovered and when she can get infected again. I heard that some epidemiologists who know better about the specifics of this disease than me, that they put the worst case at 70% of the human race as infected. The thing that I think that people are underestimating right now is that the problem is not much how many people get infected, because on one side, thankfully, there is an upper limit to the number of people we have, and it seems that the virus is not that dangerous to young people or to adult people. I mean, they still have a very high mortality to young people, which is more than 20 times the one of flu. But I mean, it's not like Ebola mortality, to say, for young people. But the big problem is the chaos that it generates in the economical system and in the healthcare system. Like, you can imagine the disruptions that we will have if even just 10% of the population gets it. I'm talking about hospitals. I'm talking about the fact that, again, if someone has an unrelated disease, you cannot cure him easily. Yes?
So I'm fascinated by the dynamics here. I mean, is this something that you have been waiting for in terms of your sort of studies and interest? Is it a foreseeable dynamic? I mean, clearly the specifics of the virus might not be, but the general concept that something like this might happen, because it seems to me that we're relatively ill prepared in the scheme of things, and we've built structures that don't really consider this. So is it something that if we had followed your line of thinking, we could have put in place preventions that would have at least mitigated some of the major parts of this? Is it foreseeable?
So there were definitely people that predicted it. I think Nassim Taleb, for sure, he's been talking for years about the risk of a pandemic. I'm sure that other people also did it. For myself, personally, I didn't happen to think about a pandemic, but already in my book, in some of my books, I've been talking about the possibility of global supply chain risks. So I didn't go into the specifics of finding a cause, of predicting a cause for disruptions, but I'm already talking about like the kind of disruption that can happen in this hyper-connected world that we have. The thing is that it's very difficult to predict a cause, like not even like a specific virus, even just the happening of a virus, but it's very easy to predict the kind of disruption that can happen so that you can somehow plan for it. For example, you can just you don't have to know why a supply chain disruption will happen to begin building systems that are resistant to it. And building a system which is resistant does not necessarily mean having huge warehouses, but it means having systems that can react very fast to disruptions. And that means the concept of circuit breakers, which I think have been proposed by Francisco Amadeo. And that's the idea that for example, the big problem right now is that our supply chain is globalized and you cannot stop people from traveling. It's difficult. So you have people traveling all around the world. So what do you do in case of a virus? The solution is not saying like everyone should stay home also during normal times. The solution is that you say you acknowledge the globalized condition of the world and you say we will put circuit breakers that will stop the connections the moment that there is a pandemic or whatever other reasons to stop connections. And the characteristic of a circuit breaker, just like the electrical circuit breaker that we have in our house, is that it does not rely on another system to break. Circuit breakers, they break locally. And the big mistake that we did for the pandemic, in my opinion, one of the big mistakes is that we are over-relying on the World Health Organization. Now, the idea of the World Health Organization as a way to pool resources and to coordinate research and emergency is great. But we shouldn't rely on the World Health Organization to tell us when there is an emergency. The emergency should be evaluated at the local level so that the local level can stop connections. And then we have all the time to coordinate a global response. But first, you stop the damage and then you think what to do about it. It's like saying if you have the Titanic, it's okay to have the helicopter which is directed by some kind of port, centralized port, which sends the helicopter, the other boats, and so on. But you're not waiting for the port to tell you to fix the holes or to begin putting people on the emergency boats. That's a decision that the captain of the boat must do. And the same thing, like the idea of blocking flights, the idea of blocking borders, the idea of blocking group events, that should be done at the local level without having the expectation of waiting for a centralized organization to tell us when there is an emergency.
So I was just reflecting as you were talking that we rely on lots of global organisations to support us in the world. I mean, the World Health Organization is obvious in the title that we expect them to look after us and kind of cover it. And we've built these structures and dependencies. And what you're basically saying is that actually local solutions are better, that having a global kind of oversight is probably not going to allow us to respond to some of these dynamics. And yet that's incredibly counterintuitive because that's the structure that we've set up and built in order to make ourselves more resilient to some of these bigger challenges. We collaborate as a globe in order to solve the big problems. But actually what you're saying is we need to start thinking completely the opposite way around.
Exactly. And I'm going to make a parallel which has nothing to do with the pandemic. But one of the things that I do when I'm consulting a manufacturing company is that I look for the circuit breakers, which means like if there is an emergency, for example, it's a chemical plant and they're having some kind of incident or whatever, is there any circuit breaker in which the local supervisor or the plant manager can take decisions without having to rely on external authorities? Do they have a budget to immediately take countermeasures without waiting for a committee to be assembled? This kind of question, is there a procedure for when there are no other procedures? Like you're probably familiar with the concept of the risk register, which is very simplified. It's basically like a table which has the list of all risks that a company might have, or a plant might have, or a production line might have. And for each risk factor, there is like, what are we doing to mitigate it? Who is responsible for it? What can be the consequences, and so on. And the thing that there should always be is one more line, which is none of the above. And answering questions, what do we do when there is none of the above? Or what do we do when one of the procedures above is blocked for any reason, including the ones which can't be foreseen? And that's something which is very important and should be a part of all risk management plans and emergency organizations. Another parallel that you can make is there is this saying that the best managers are the ones that makes themselves dispensable. The same can be said about emergency organizations. In a way, the best emergency organizations are the ones that makes themselves dispensable. And that's something that, in a way, the World Health Organization should also do, in my limited opinion, which is like not telling other local health organization, you depend on me, but rather saying like, you do your own independent thing, and then I'm there on top of it to coordinate help on top of that. Because otherwise we will always be too slow, we will always be 2 steps behind, and we will always have blind spots.
So that makes perfect sense, but it's kind of counterintuitive really, because if you look at the direction of travel in most organizations, there's this idea of having global consistency, global standards, global processes, and so the idea that you would empower people locally goes fundamentally against that, because you want to have this consistency, and so you get this view that everything comes out of head office. We expect to have global standards. We want everybody to comply with those global standards. And therefore, the local autonomy that you're talking about does run contrary to lots of the ways that organizations want to run themselves. I mean, if I think of something like McDonald's, they have consistent global processes so that whichever restaurant you go into, there will be a certain food hygiene standard, there will be a certain quality of ingredient standard, and so on and so forth. And so what you're proposing fundamentally shifts away from that central command and control structure into something that's a lot more localized. And that's a hell of a shift.
Yes. And I just want to build on what you were saying about standardized processes and command and control. The thing is that those two approaches are complementary. They're not exclusive. The problem is not the centralized, it's the reliance on the centralized. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a centralized. It means that we should not rely on that and that there should be parallel systems. I'm making an example back to manufacturing, just in time. So the idea of just in time, how they're teaching it mostly in business schools, is that just in time is the idea that before that you had the truck that brings components to the plant, and then you store the components in the warehouse, and then from the warehouse you move them to the production line, and that's a lot of costs because you're spending time to move the components twice, and you're spending in storage costs. And so there is this concept of just in time, which is we ask the truck to come at the right moment, so that we only need to take the components from the truck directly to the production line. That's correct. But then business school says the point of just in time is that we avoid waste. And I disagree with that. That's a beneficial byproduct, but it's not the point of just in time. The point of just in time is that the warehouse, it's a buffer. And the point of just in time is to remove buffers so that problems surface so that we can address them. So what happens if you don't have a warehouse? If the truck is even 10 minutes late, you perceive it as a problem, and you will solve that problem. If instead you have a warehouse, you don't care if the truck is 1 day late, because you just use the buffer from the warehouse. So what happens is that the more buffers you're using, the more the operations that are upstream will be lax and are unreliable and volatile, and they will have problems. The big benefit of just in time is that you remove buffers so that the surface upstream, so that the problems upstream of buffers surface, they become urgent, and because they become urgent, they get solved. So that you reinforce all your operations. Now, on the other side, I'm not saying that the problem of companies that are implementing just-in-time too well is that they're getting screwed during the coronavirus epidemic, for example, if their supply chain is relying on components from China. And the thing that I want to pass is that those two concepts, having warehouse and just-in-time, they're not mutually exclusive. So, for example, you can have a rule like we have an emergency buffer in the warehouse, but the rule is that we cannot use it. And, for example, the plant manager has to manually sign that there is an emergency so that the warehouse can be used. In this way, you still grab most of the benefits of just-in-time, reduce handling costs, and surfacing problem and strengthening the supply chain and strengthening operations. And you also do not get fragile, which is the main downside of just-in-time. And the same parallel can be applied to everything. So you have a spectrum, and on one side of the spectrum, you have a lot of redundancy and inefficiency. And on the other side, you have a lot of efficiency and fragility. And the thing that people don't understand is that they're not mutually exclusive. Because you can just say that the redundancy is not usable in normal times. And in that way, you get to grab the benefits of the redundancy without having the downsides, most of the downsides.
So that's fascinating, but it runs counterintuitively to say, an accountant's or a process excellence person's view of the world, where they're trying to eliminate friction, remove redundancy, get things to run as slickly as possible. And what you're basically saying is we need to do precisely the opposite of that and add in some of these processes, because when things go wrong, the fragility of the process, if it's too efficient, means that you can't respond to changing circumstances.
Exactly. But on the other side, you don't need to be inefficient in your day-to-day. The thing is that you want to have processes that are extremely efficient and optimized in your day-to-day, and yet they have some not utilized form of redundancy, which is helping you when things go wrong. This is by the way. So I happen to have written a book on this, which is called Best Practices for Operational Excellence. And the thing that a lot of readers, I think, would be surprised is that I'm basically promoting a lot of best practices, which are inefficient in their day-to-day, but they become extremely efficient on the long term, because you solve problems once and for all, and you solve them in the way which is not like just putting them under the rug so that they will surface one day, but but you're actually solving them for good, and they become a competitive advantage over the long term, because you're getting long-term benefits that no one else is getting. And I'm making an example. One of the hills I will die for is, for example, that CEOs have to do at least one plant inspection per month. I'm assuming manufacturing companies, CEOs. And it's extremely inefficient from one point of view, because the CEO is the person that has the largest leverage in the firm, and you're telling him to do something which will be spotted, which will impact at most directly the 10 workers that are working on the production line in which the CEO is going to make his 30 minutes walk that month. On the other side, it's extremely efficient because that's the most effective way that I know of. On one side, to make sure that problems are solved in the field in a way which is resistant, and on the other side, to make sure that the CEO gets aware of the problems that are happening on the production line. I don't know a single most effective way. And then you have benefits, because if the CEO is saying for stuff, for example, you should work, say, I'm making an example for the coronavirus. The CEO is saying, like, you guys should all wear face mask. I'm making an example. And then you see the CEO that works without the face mask and not wear the face mask, especially if they can get away with it, explaining that they're working worse with the face mask because it's impeding their movements or so on. Instead, if you get the CEO to make the 30 minutes walk on the line production every month, and during the 30 minutes walk, the CEO is wearing the face mask, then that's the single most effective way that you have to pass the message that face masks are to be worn. And that's exactly the inefficiency, the cost is what passes the message. Half of the advertisers will tell you that one of the reasons why advertisements work is because it's expensive. It's a costly signal, and because it's a costly signal, people care about it. And the same thing is the CEO spending the time to wear the face mask, spending the time to go visit a production line. It's extremely inefficient. It's extremely costly way for him to spend his time. And therefore, it's extremely effective.
I'd never really thought about it in those terms. I mean, I'd always seen those exercises where the CEO goes and visits the factory floor as being intelligence gathering for them, finding out what's going on because they're stuck in their boardroom miles away from reality. But the way you've pictured it around this costly signaling device, and I should explain to listeners who aren't aware of what that means, this is the idea that you do something that is ludicrously expensive to make a point. So a good example would be a peacock, where they have ridiculous feathers that serve no purpose except to demonstrate that they are so comfortable that they can have these ridiculous feathers that serve no other purpose so that they can look more attractive to potential partners. And so this idea of turning the CEO going around doing something that doesn't make any sense from a financial perspective is very powerful because what it does is it transmits a message to everybody that this is really expensive, and therefore if they're doing something, it is because they think it's really important. And I think that's a fascinating idea, because in the context of a world where people are trying to cost cut, this becomes even more challenging to get through. So I'm really intrigued. Is this something that you, when you speak to companies, does this resonate with them? Are you finding that people get this, or is this a step too far, a little bit too difficult for them?
It's definitely a struggle. The thing that I've gotten better over time is to recognizing between my potential clients, the one which will follow the advice and the ones which will not, very, very early, so that we are not wasting each other's time. For example, one of the rules that I have is that I only work with a company if I'm either working, either if the CEO comes to my training, or like if it's like a local branch, the highest member of the organization at the branch comes, for example, the country director or the plant manager. Because what happens otherwise, I had people in the past, a CEO, for example, that tells me like, you come to my company and you train my managers, for example. But that's not gonna work, or that's gonna work up to a certain extent, because the problem is that then, if the CEO does not do it, then the message that will pass is that it's a priority, but it's not really a priority. And the moment that the CEO says that the priority is another one, then everything will fall like a castle of cards. And the only way that you can create sustainable change in an organization is either if the CEO is the one which actually takes which is spending some of his time in a costly way so that he passes the message that costs for the long term are worth paying. Or at least he spends some costly time telling his managers that he believes in the cost that I'm telling them to pay in their day-to-day, because he believes that they will be worth the long-term benefits. Because, there is this thing about core values. A lot of companies, they have those wonderfully sounding core values, which then they don't really, they struggle to implement in their day-to-day. And the problem is that core values, they usually have a short-term cost and a long-term benefit. And the problem is that a lot of time managers and supervisors and employees, they see the benefit of the long-term benefit of the core value, but they are scared that if they incur the cost of the core value in the short term, they will be judged by their own manager for having been inefficient, because the benefit of the long-term benefit still has to come, and it will come after the year-end evaluation. And the only way that you can get past this chasm is if this person's manager is the first one who pays those costs, those short-term costs, so that it becomes admissible also for the managers and for the supervisors and for the line workers to pay the short-term costs. Otherwise, no one's going to pay them. I want to add one more thing. There is this wonderful book by Rory Sutherland, Alchemy. And it says two things. So the first thing, that one of the two main points is that efficiency, like a lot of the things that work, are visibly inefficient. And that's part of the reasons why they work. And something which is measurably optimally efficient it's also almost impossible that it's that it's going to be optimally effective. And then the second thing, he has this wonderful sentence, which is that a flower is a weed with some marketing, I think, something like this.
Yeah, it's a flower is a weed with a marketing budget.
Exactly. Weed with a marketing budget. And the thing which I find appalling is that a lot of CEOs in the company, they're wonderful, wonderful salespeople, but externally. and they act like a weed internally inside their company with the production, with the operations, meaning that they spend little marketing in promoting the importance of core values in the operations. And of course, I'm not talking about financial marketing budget because it's fairly easy that they spend actually a big amount of money to try to improve their operations inside, but they're not spending time. And time is the reason why they're not spending time is because time is probably the most expensive resource that they have. But exactly for this reason is also the most effective.
I think that's a really interesting take on the kind of core premise of Rory's book, which I will briefly and crassly summarize as: sometimes we have to do things that seem counterintuitive, sometimes we have to do things that seem wasteful, sometimes we have to do things that seem illogical. And of course, all of those things come from traditional kind of accounting-based, sensible, logical processes, as opposed to more intuitive kind of human processes. And he, quotes the example of Red Bull in the book, saying, if you were setting out to invent a new soft drink, you wouldn't invent Red Bull because it's totally counterintuitive. Very small cans, taste disgusting, and so on and so forth. And so I think there's this lovely clash between what is logical and sensible. And that, of course, is easy for people to do because it's easy to justify spending your time, if you're a CEO, going out and marketing your company. That looks good from a shareholder perspective. It feels kind of logical and a good use of time. And the point you're quite rightly making is actually a better use of your time is to do things that don't pass that kind of accounting cost-based test because they're really, really powerful precisely for the reason that they are expensive. So CEOs ought to be spending time doing that internal marketing as much as they do externally, but that's a lot harder to justify and it's not logical, and therefore most of them probably don't do it as much as they should.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not gonna lie to you, there are a lot of people, managers, organizations which are completely rejecting this idea. And there are the organizations which are accepting. And the thing that I've seen in my professional life is that there are organizations which are working without the CEO spending time on their operations, but they're working because they're compensating with other aspects. But the operations are not working. And the only reliable way that I've seen for operations to work is exactly when the CEO or the highest person in the location, so the plant manager or the country director, they're actually spending time on the floor with the workers.
Look, I could keep talking to you for hours because I think this stuff is absolutely fascinating, but I want to make sure before we run out of time that we can talk a little bit about you, and I'm particularly interested in how you came into this space. How did you get interested in these topics?
I got into operations management because I've been working for a few years in the consulting unit of DuPont. So I began working in the unit which was consulting for workplace safety, and then also expanded in operational excellence. And then I quit the company to open my own consulting practice in Italy. And then I've been keeping studying the field and working on that side. And then I've integrated both from a lot of behavioral science, from advertising, and then all the part of risk management. I've gotten it from basically what I will call like the Nassim Taleb school. And then I've been using like a lot of those very practical, not necessarily sensible, but just judging on the effectiveness point of view filters. And yeah, that's what I've been doing on that side. But I'm only spending a limited amount of time consulting companies on operations. The other amount of time I'm spending is writing books and studying human behavior. And I've been writing, for example, a book on autism. There will be a book which I will publish, the second edition. It's called The Control Heuristic this summer, and it's about the motivations for human behavior. And the thing that I'm doing differently from most other people that are studying this subject is that I'm completely rejecting all narratives. The thing you will notice in my books is that I don't tell stories, because I think that on one side, stories are a wonderful way to engage the audience. But on the other side, if you care about the direction of cause-effect, they're very misleading. So stories are great from a descriptive point of view, but they're terrible from a causal point of view. And what I'm doing instead is that I'm trying to get the cause-effect direction right. And that means studying stuff mostly from the bottom-up point of view. So I've been using this lens to publish a book on autism, a book on human behavior, a book on personal growth, which is called 100 Truths You Will Learn Too Late, and then a book on operations management, which is called The Best Practices for Operational Excellence. Yeah.
And if people want to follow you on Twitter or find you on your website, can you tell them how they do that?
Yes, thank you. So my website is luca-dellanna.com. So it's luca-dellanna.com. And there you can read about my essays, you can read about my books. And I also have this weekly newsletter, which is called The Thoughts of the Week, in which I'm taking the 5 best, the most timeless thoughts that I encountered during the week. So it's not about something which is relevant today but will be forgotten tomorrow, but I'm trying to get stuff that you will remember that will be useful for the rest of your life. And you can subscribe for free at my newsletter, and you get this every week. Otherwise, my books can be found both on Amazon and on gumroad.com. And I would be extremely, I would suggest my readers to buy it from gumroad.com, both because sometimes I add chapters. 1 year later, I maybe add one extra chapter to the book, and you receive it if you bought it from Gumroad. And the selfish reason is because I get much higher royalties on Gumroad than Amazon. So if you want to support me. And on Twitter, you can find me. It's Dellanna Luca. So DELLANNALUCA. And I spend most of the year in Italy, and a few months usually in Singapore. Yeah.
And as someone that has himself recently subscribed to that newsletter, I can assure the listeners that it is highly worthwhile, really interesting insights that you provide there. And look, I want to say thank you as well for the work that you're doing on Twitter. Sounds slightly strange, but I think you are really providing a valuable service of giving us new insights into things that we're not necessarily getting from traditional media. And it's nice to hold politicians to account at a time when they're not necessarily all doing the things that we need them to. And thank you also for being a really good case study for why social media is a good thing. Because if you hadn't been doing your work on Twitter, I wouldn't have found you and this conversation wouldn't have taken place. So a great advertisement of the positive side of social media in a world where we often hear about the negatives. But above all, Luca, thank you so much for appearing on the podcast. It's been incredibly insightful. I've really enjoyed the time in the company. And thank you very much indeed, and hopefully see you on here very soon.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much.
So that's it for another Human Risk podcast. My thanks to you for listening and to Luca for appearing on the show, particularly at such short notice. Do, as ever, provide your feedback. If you have a chance to rate the show on whichever platform you use, that will help me to continue to keep the profile as high as it is, and therefore continue to attract the kind of guests that we've managed to get so far. If you're not already subscribed, you'll find the Human Risk Podcast on whichever platform you use to get your podcasts. And don't forget, if you're not a subscriber to the Human Risk newsletter, you'll find details of that at human-risk.com, along with details of the video channel and various other blogs and human risk related initiatives. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again on another episode of the Human Risk Podcast very soon.